Hi everyone, and welcome to session 6 of Fabric Fodder. Today we're going to start out with some stamping on fabric. Now, stamping on fabric is something that is kind of one of the basics that we're still on, along with the painting on fabric and stenciling on fabric, which we will do after we're finished with some of this stamping. Stamping is very similar to printing, just on a much smaller scale. So what we're starting out with today is with commercial stamps, ones that you can purchase rather than using ones that we make ourselves. We're going to be moving after this session into doing some of those DIY stamps. So I'm going to be showing you 5 or 6 different techniques for how you can create stamps in order to create your own fabric, whether it's small pieces or yardage. So we're going to have those coming up, but today is just kind of the basics of using paints and inks and rubber stamps, polymer stamps, and foam stamps. And from then we will branch out and start creating our own stamps. So look for those upcoming videos over the next week or so. It's been a little bit crazy here. We've had close to 100-degree weather. I didn't even bother to try to straighten my hair today. And I've just had life happening this week. I hate insurance companies. But anyway, that's another story that I'm not going into. So anyway, enjoy learning about stamping on fabric. Thanks a bunch. So in this video, we're going to start talking about stamping on fabric. Stamping and printing are very, very similar. But with stamping is one of what I kind of call the 3 cornerstones. I guess if you have a 3-legged stool, it would be a cornerstone. Anyway, it's one of the 3. The first one was the painting, where we've done those couple of video series on painting on dry fabric and painting on wet fabric. And that's more about just kind of getting an idea of how paint interacts with the fabric and that sort of thing. With stamping, it's another way to apply paint or ink to a fabric. What we're going to talk about in this specific video is some commercially available stamps. After this video, I have a whole series that I'm going to try to get this week. It's been a little crazy, but I'm going to try to get through some of them where we're making our own stamps. So we'll make some stamps with foam. We'll carve some out of erasers. We'll do some roller stamps. We'll do some block printing. And then it's printing with kind of stuff you find around the house. So there's at least 5, if not more, videos that go along with this stamping. But like I said, we're going to start out with first just talking about commercially available stamps. There's basically 3 main types. You have your rubber stamps, you have polymer stamps, which are the clear ones, and then you have foam stamps. Here's one that's better to see. You have foam stamps, and these are laser cut out of thick foam. Those are predominantly the kinds of stamps that are available, and all 3 of them work really well on fabric. Now, in terms of the paints and inks and such, I'm going to be using just some regular acrylic paints. I'm going to be using some different types of inks, some StazOn, some archival, and some distress. I like the oxide for printing on fabric versus the regular distress ink, but both will work. Now, the thing to remember with this, 90% of when I'm doing mixed media stuff on fabric, it's not going to be something that's going to be washed. If you're intending to wash it, I highly recommend you playing with whatever technique you want to use on a sample piece and wash it in advance. A lot of stuff like the distress inks are going to wash out. You need to add fabric medium to any acrylics. And some of the other inks, this is a solvent ink, and this is a my brain just completely went. I'll have to add that it's a dye ink, sorry. So a dye ink, a solvent ink, and these are water-based inks. So they all can react differently. Also, when you're washing something that you've done some mixed media on, I wouldn't run it through the washing machine. I would definitely wash it by hand. But be aware, you may lose some detail, you may lose some color, or it may just wash out. As always, experiment first. And I've meant to say that on some of the other videos, but you want to experiment first. Now, when you're using the acrylic ink, in order to get it, or the acrylic paint, in order to get it into a smooth surface, I use a brayer, and then you can use either a piece of glass or a piece of plexiglass. And I squirt the paint onto here with the brayer, roll it out into a smooth layer. Another option that you may have is using your jelly plate, and this one's a hot mess, but it's because I just put stuff on it, and then eventually I'll do a pull off of it that picks all this grungy gunk off. But this also works great as a substrate. Just be aware, it tends to dry faster on a jelly plate than it does on just a piece of acrylic. So, but you do need generally a roller and a substrate to get the best effect. If you're doing something small, you can generally potentially use like a foam brush or even just a regular brush to brush it onto the stamp, but you probably won't get as even a coating of the paint onto your stamp. When I am buying rubber stamps that I want to use on fabric, I try to find stamps that are much more graphic and simple and not a lot of detail. When you're using acrylic paint or even ink pads onto fabric, because fabric is woven and it has a texture, even on the very tightest of woven fabrics, you're not going to get as clean and crisp of an image as you would if you were doing it onto paper. So I tend to look for much more graphic styles. Also patterns that in a repeat on fabric could make an interesting pattern on the fabric. So those are just a few of and they can be mounted on wood, or they can actually be unmounted as well. Polymer stamps, the same sort of thing. I love a grid. I love an alphabet. I also have alphabets in my wood stamps. One of my absolute favorite things to stamp onto fabric is letters and numbers. So this polymer stamps, again, looking for something. For instance, these are very graphically drawn, hand-drawn looking, again, letters and something more geometric. On the foam stamps, there's the foamies, the art foamies, and those are a lot of fun. I just have a couple of these. These haven't been out super long, but they are cool. Then there's also ones like these that are foam that are attached to a heavy duty, it's kind of like heavy chipboard or light chipboard or heavy cardstock weight of acrylic with the foam attached to it. And this is very similar to the ones that we can make. But those also are great. And again, looking for ones that have, are very graphic and simple. Now these are two-sided. These have it both on one side of the plastic and the other side of the plastic, which is a great way to maximize the plastic. So anyway, alrighty, so let's go ahead and grab a piece of fabric. Now on my undercloth here, there's a lot of texture, not just the paint on there. And be aware when you're stamping, especially when the foam stamps, that texture will come through. So it's actually something that you can use by having something textured underneath when you stamp on top of it, and it'll kind of come through. So, all right, let's go ahead and get started with our acrylic plate and just do some stamping on it. Now, when I'm using acrylic, I'm just going to add just a couple drops. This comes out usually too fast. I don't want it too wet, and that's probably too much for this plate, but we'll go ahead and spread it out. Am I on camera or am I off to the side? I sometimes forget to look. So I'm just smoothing it out on the plate. Now, when I am stamping with acrylic paints on my stamps, I do clean them off afterwards. If I'm just using ink, I generally don't. So I'm just going to use this square. It's obviously not a terribly flat stamp to get. Sometimes if the paint doesn't want to go, I can just take my roller and put it on there. You can stamp, re-ink. I'm going to leave some space so that I can put with a different color. I could do a different shape. So let's just do 5 of these. And you can see, if you have the time and the desire, you could do yardage this way. When we get to carved stamps, I'll re-show you that piece of fabric that was like 4 yards long that I stamped with a 1x2 stamp for 4 yards. That took forever. Okay, so I'm going to set this, I'm going to clean it super fast and set that off to the side and do a different color, and we'll use the gel plate as the, this is where having baby wipes right there is good to go. Okay, so let's not do that bright of a color. Let's do this dull purple. And run the paint off of that. Just realized I didn't do my stamp. Let's wipe it off real quick before it dries on there. Inks, like I said, I usually just leave inks on there, but paints I like to clean off. All right, so I'm going to use the circle. And see, because even if it's uneven, using the gel plate, it's a little softer. Let's see how you can then create a pattern. Now, if I were doing this out of an ink, let's go ahead and do it with, let's do the same shapes. With the oxide ink. Ink your stamp, don't stamp your ink. That's what isn't that what they always say? Get this out of the way so I don't put my arm in it. So this is a similar color, but you can see then doing this with I do like the oxide inks on the fabric. They have a very much crisper look to them than some other inks do. Let's do the circles out of. Where do I have? Let's do this one. I just grabbed a few colors. I didn't intend to do these all on the same piece, so the fact that I have somewhat similar colors. But a lot of you may already have a lot of colors of distress. So this may be something that would work well for you. And I do wipe distresses off too, because they tend to stay a little sticky. Anyway, so there that is. So it kind of shows you the difference between the paint and the oxides. They really don't come out terribly different. The beauty of the acrylic paint over the inks is that the inks, you're going to be using colors that are available, whereas the colors available using acrylic paints is somewhat limitless, because you can then go ahead and mix whatever color you want. So there's a great variety with that. Now let's go ahead and look at doing another piece with pulling out some of the foam stamps. Let's do one bit. Oh, let's use that guy. He's cute. With that, and one with one of the foamy stamps. So again, this is foam on a thin sheet of acrylic, and this is just super thick. It's a different, it feels like a different, I think it's just a closed cell foam. This is just uses a laser cutter to cut those out. So let's see, do we want to do, should we do some more paint? Let's do, I probably should check that. Do a blue. If you don't have a roller, you can use a foam to spread it out nice and evenly. See how I've spread that out if you don't happen to have a roller. So with my paint on my foam stamp, and what's nice about the foam stamps versus the hard rubber is you can, well, I didn't have enough paint on there. They do soak up the paint, I will admit. Which is why we experiment and play, so we know how things are gonna operate. So we'll just paint that on. The foam gives it a nice even coating. It's always fun to demo something and have it not work. They're much better. So let's go ahead and do that with the foam again. The foam brush on the foam stamp. It's just like when you're painting cabinets, how you end up using a foam roller versus a brush, because it gives a more even coat. So it gives, the foam ones are hands down some of my favorites for stamping onto fabric. And again, I do clean these off so that they stay foamy. Otherwise, the acrylic paint tends to fill in the holes. So I just get the majority of it off of them. And anybody who knows me, I am not a stamp cleaner, except when I'm using acrylics on them. So that gives you a good idea on the, let me pull out, okay, so that's the foam. Let me pull out some of these polymer stamps. I have another piece of acrylic to do this. And let's go ahead, since I have paint out already, let's do another one with paint. We'll do a hot pink here. I'm trying to be miserly with my paint, and I think I'm doing too miserly. I'm not putting enough on there. All right. And you figure out what works best for you, whether stamping your stamp into the paint or rollering or foaming, brushing it on. It's kind of an experimental thing at what works best for you that you like. Now, again, with the polymer stamps, they're a little more gushy, so you can really press them down into your fabric and then peel them off. That wasn't the cleanest of ink jobs just because I didn't put enough of the paint on there. So let's just do a little with my oxide inks. Clean it off of there. The fastest, easiest, I personally feel, is like any kind of stamping, is just using an ink pad. But if you're, like I said, if you're wanting it to be a little bit more permanent, the oxide stuff will wash out. So, but you can see foam, and then these are done with the polymer stamps. So, as I said, basically we have rubber stamps, polymer stamps, and foam stamps. And I've shown you this all on white fabric, but you can also do stuff on colored fabrics. You can actually do some on dark fabrics. Now, I have found that doing on like a black fabric, let's pull this one out, on a black fabric or a dark fabric, I have found that the inks tend to kind of just bleed down into the fabric. They look really great when you first put them on. But then as they dry, they kind of just suck down into the fabric and are not quite as vibrant as they appear to be at first. Now, when we try doing with the acrylics, you're going to find it will show a little bit better. And let's just use this again. We'll just use the same color of ink too, so I don't have to clean it off much. So then when we take, using the same stamp with the acrylic paint, of course, now this, the milled lavender of the oxide's gonna prove me wrong and not be, and not blend in as it dries. But as you can see with acrylics, they can be done onto dark fabric. Again, always have a little scrap piece before you're gonna start a project to test out how the ink is going to, or the paint is going to work on your fabric, or whether or not it's going to bleed down in. So anyway, so dark fabrics with the ink and the paint. Now, typically of these kind of inks, I only have them in dark colors. I have done it with metallics with StazOn, and that does work quite well, actually. So we've got the dark with paint and ink. We've got paint with foam and polymer, and then we've got paint with rubber stamps and the ink with the rubber stamps. But those are really cool things to be putting details, adding elements, etc. to something, for instance, with the backgrounds potentially that we've made with painting the fabric. It also is a great way to create a pattern if you're wanting to make yardage. So stamping is a ton of fun with commercial stamps. It's even more fun when we start playing with, let's do our own thing with the stamps. So stay tuned for those. I'm going to be working on those over this coming week, and we'll start having some fun. Thanks a bunch.